What's up guys, and welcome back to another video covering Pokemon Legends Arceus. So obviously we're still very early on in the phase for this game in terms of the initial announcement has just happened. We haven't had any further gameplay trailers or anything of the sort, and we are very far away from release, no hard release date at all. So we're still talking about how things could be done, or how they might be done, as opposed to this is how they are being done, and we've obviously spirals off of there. So what we're going to talk about today is the Pokédex in Pokemon Legends Arceus, because it's going to, well, I say it's going to work quite differently. You think it would work quite differently in these games, or this game, as opposed to pretty much every other game beforehand. So if I pull up the little blur we have from the Pokemon Legends Arceus website explaining basically the main goal of this game, you can see it says the Pokemon Legends Arceus game honours past Pokemon games' core gameplay while infusing new action and RPG elements. So it's basically saying, it's going to focus on the core gameplay of catching Pokemon and battling with Pokemon, but new action and RPG elements. Now this is obviously a very broad category. Action could be, real-time combat. It could be having some sort of actual health system and stuff for the player character, that sort of thing. Whereas RPG elements could sort of be looking more to say, okay, maybe you can upgrade stuff, role-playing, that general sort of thing. Yeah, it's a wide-ranging category, so we can't look too much into that. But it's the second part that intrigues me a lot actually, and it says you'll need to catch, survey and research wild Pokemon in a long gone era of the Sinnoh region to create and complete the region's first Pokédex. And it's the phrasing of catch, survey and research wild Pokemon in a long gone era of the Sinnoh region. So the Pokédex has been around since obviously the very first game in the Pokemon series, in Pokemon Red and Blue, and obviously in these games it was presented to the player as a Professor Oak asking you to go and complete the Pokédex for his research. And he would state something like, I've always wanted to do it myself, but now I'm too old. And it was very much presented, at least in the first, let's say, game or two, as a please go and categorise all of the Pokemon. However, it's become increasingly more clear, especially because we've had repeated games that are basically sequels or follow-ons, to the ones beforehand, that, we're not really completing the Pokédex for the first time, are we? We're just going around and registering the Pokemon for ourselves, and it's less of a actual research expedition and more of a, go and tick a checklist off, please, and that's how you call yourself a Pokemon Master, by having every Pokemon. It's less of the actual science and research side, and more of a, just like a game side almost effectively, which is what it is. However, we're now being told to create and complete the region's first Pokédex, Sinnoh's first ever Pokédex. And this can be taken a few different ways. One being we actually need to find out what Pokemon live here and actually research them. Or it can be we just need to, it's basically the same thing I'm saying in two different ways. We need to find out what lives here, i.e. that's a Pokemon. What is it? What's its name? What do we call it? Etc. Or what Pokemon live in Sinnoh, i.e. there's a lot of other regions around the world. We know what Pokemon live in some of those. Which ones are here? Either new Pokemon effectively, in terms of the context of the game, as opposed to entirely new Pokemon, versus just what is the makeup of the Sinnoh region. So there's obviously a few Pokemon like Platinum, Arceus, Giratina, obviously the legendaries that effectively are only in Sinnoh, at least, we should only be in Sinnoh, especially at this time of the plotline, who knows, that effectively should be new. However, there are some like, Bidoof, it might be available in other regions, Gloom, available in other regions, that sort of thing. And for a researcher arriving in Sinnoh, they can spot Gloom and say, oh yeah, we know Gloom, he's from Kanto as well, and we know Bidoof, he's from, I don't know, some other regions. You get the idea. Which is obviously slightly different to, whoa, that's a new Pokemon no one has ever seen before, let's find out about it effectively. So it can be taken a few different ways. We're going to talk about it in this video, and how the Pokédex itself in this game might actually work and function. So the Pokédex in the modern era games, is generally presented as some sort of handheld computer. So obviously the design has been varied and changing in every single game, pretty much. Obviously in the original Red Blue it was like a little, PDA, I suppose, that sort of effect. Whereas now we obviously have the Rotom Pokédex. We've had Pokédex is shaped like phones, laptop in Let's Go as well. So there's been a wide range of different designs, but of course it's generally been some sort of handheld machine, effectively, let's say. And that's the first thing we'll have to talk about in a minute, because it's not really going to work in the setting of Legends Arceus, is it? So that's one thing to think about. But in terms of what the Pokédex can actually do, and actually does for us, it's added things and changed things slightly over the years, but the general theme and the general purpose remains true. It's to show a list of Pokemon and details about them. So we have Pikachu, he is number X in the Pokédex, here is his height and his weight, and here is a bit of information about Pikachu. He is the mouse Pokemon, that sort of thing. As I say, it's been enhanced over the years to include stuff like a habitat, so where is Pikachu actually found in the region, and then other little nice things like a cry, the size of him, does he have any other forms? So obviously the Pokédex shows the multiple forms of the Pokemon, whether that's gender differences or whether that's shininess, you get the idea. That's sort of the purpose of the Pokédex. Now, of course, the makeup of it changes over different games. So, of course, we had originally the regional Pokédex in terms of Kanto, Johto, Ho, and Sinnoh, and then a national Pokédex, which is every Pokemon in existence at that time. Of course, the national Pokédex dropped off in Generation 7, where Sun, Moon, Ultra Sun, and Ultra Moon only had a regional dex. And of course, then Sword and Shield took it a step further and actually removed every Pokemon that wasn't in a regional dex. So the national dex is sort of faded away and merged into Pokemon Bank and Pokemon Home in particular, whereas I don't think it's really called the National Pokédex anymore, it's just the Pokédex. But effectively they all over the years give the same sort of purpose. It's a list of Pokemon with information about them. So that's what we will be following in terms of the purpose of the Pokédex, thinking about Legends Arceus. So the first thing to think about, as I mentioned just now, is we're not really going to have a phone or some sort of PDA back in the time period that Legends Arceus is set. It's when the Sinnoh region is first being settled, and you can tell just by the general design and theme of the trailer that it's certainly not going to be a modern era game. We have old Pokeballs, for example, and stuff like that. So there's going to be no phone. So the most likely alternative to that is some sort of journal or some sort of book, effectively, that we're going to have to write in to build up our Pokédex. So we have a few books stacked on the table here, so I'm not sure whether one of these could be basically representing the Pokédex that we will have. It's got a picture of Sinnoh on the front of this, or a drawing of Sinnoh. Maybe this is the Sinnoh Pokédex, where it's literally just a notepad where researchers have gone in, and you just write down stuff about Pokemon, because essentially back in this time period as well, there's no internet, there's no long-range communication at all, so there is no Pokédex. Essentially there is just research notes, which case is not going to be as tidily set up, for example, especially if you're writing in literal pages. There is no way to then resort them around. If the first Pokemon you see is in the middle of the Pokédex, well, he's just going to be on the first page of the book, unless you tear pages out and move them around. But we won't get too far into that. So it's most likely going to be some form of book or journal that functions as our Pokédex in this game, effectively. And I think one thing that might be really cool is actually to present it to the user, to the player, as a written artifact. So rather than, as obviously in the modern games we have this technical view where we have buttons and so on, which is because the Pokédex have screens. However, this Pokédex isn't going to have a screen, it's going to have just pages. So what would be really cool is if literally scrolling through the Pokédex is something akin to flicking pages in a book, and having each page for be about a Pokemon, for example, and be actually written in rather than being fonts, let's say. I mean, obviously some form of font, but have a written font as opposed to a printed font, let's say. And particularly, I'm picking out the picture of the free starters here, having the picture of the Pokemon that appears in the Dex be literally a drawing as opposed to an actual model or an image. Just literally have it be a drawing of some description, because again, you're not going to have a model in the era we're set in. It's going to have to be sort of handwritten, hand-drawn artifacts. So I think that would be a really cool design to see. I understand it would be losing a bit of functionality in that if without showing the model directly, there's no way to view the model, for example, but it would definitely fit the theme of the game a bit more to actually sort of do away with a little bit of the glamour, I suppose, and have it be a nice, drawn thing. Obviously, it's still a game, and it's still going to have to be, printed in some way, and that idea, but actually have it be emulating a drawing and emulating a notepad, as opposed to, what we see in the modern games. So that might be a really interesting design for a first part. So what I'm imagining is you get given some form of journal. Now, whether that journal has got like a little bit of a outline already, each page has just got boxes to fill in, for example, or whether it could just be a straightforward journal. It's not going to matter to the player, of course. I'm not saying we're going to actually have to literally write notes in the game. It's just the theory of it. I imagine it will be a case of we get given the book, and then as we collect Pokemon, for example, these pages start to fill in, and then viewing the Pokédex is literally a case of flicking through the pages until you find the Pokemon you want, for example. But one thing to think about, especially since, as I say, this time it looks like we are actually, or possibly actually, writing the Pokédex ourselves. Whereas in the modern games, it's pretty much like, well, Oak says he wants to collect the whole category of Pokemon in Kanto. That's obviously a bit old news. That was at the start of the series, and it's obvious, in the modern era that these Pokemon have been categorized. Maybe there are some that haven't been, like the rarer legendaries, but the majority of them have been found and known for a while. And it seems the Pokédex in the modern games is just registering that, okay, you now have X Pokemon, here is X Pokemon's data, as it's sort of fetching from a database somewhere and only sort of making it available to you once you have it yourself. Similarly, if you look in the anime where Ash's Pokédex just sort of chirps up and says, yep, this is the information about Spearow, sometimes even before he actually catches it, which indicates it's just a big database as opposed to you're literally putting the entries in yourself. However, because this is an old setting, there's not going to be some sort of central database, especially if it's a notebook. We're not going to be able to encounter a Pokemon and then show it to the notebook, and then the notebook say, oh, here is some magic page appearing, here is all the information. Just doesn't make sense. Now, they could still very well follow the same pattern for Legends Arceus. They could just do that, and that would be entirely fine, to some extent, but they could do more. And one of these things is, well, maybe you can actually fill in the Pokédex yourself. And this may link into the fact that a lot of Pokédex entries over the years are a little bit silly. We've got Magcargo is a good and often example where its body temperature is approximately 18,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,000 degrees Celsius, which, if he was actually real, would not work. He would melt the ground and it would just be a complete mess. Similarly, Larvitar apparently eats an entire mountain. So, if that was actually real, surely there would be literally no mountains in the world, because Larvitar would eat them all and that would be that. Plus, how does a little creature like that eat a whole mountain? And then finally, Phantump is not quite necessarily unbelievable, but it's more sort of folk-tale-y, where, according to old tales, the Pokemon are stumps possessed by spirits of children who died while lost in the forest. And that sounds more like a tale where, you might be passed down over generations as a spooky story, or, don't go in the woods, children, you'll turn into a Phantump, that sort of thing. There are many Pokédex entries out there that just seem unbelievable or a bit silly. And one fun theory, I suppose, that's been passed around in the community for a while is actually, well, it's because you're a 10-year-old boy, and you see a Magcargo and say, whoa, it must be 18,000 degrees, and it's just completely made up by a 10-year-old child, which works if you assume that, the modern era Pokemon games do that, where you literally catch Pokemon and you're writing out the Pokédex entry yourself. Which doesn't seem to be indicated in some cases, like again Ash in the anime, the Pokédex tells him, and so on. So the other option is, well, maybe again these were we could fulfill this prophecy effectively by having the protagonists of Pokemon Legends Arceus actually write out these Pokédex entries themselves in this way, and that's how we get the silly Pokédex entries. Again, I don't think it would be a case of the player gets invited to say, you've caught Magcargo, would you like to write a Pokédex entry about it? Like a make your own Pokédex. I don't think they would go that route, because that's straying probably a little too far from the formula and the general makeup of the games, but it would be an interesting addition to the theory, that people discuss, in that, if we're saying that Legends Arceus is the first Sinnoh Pokédex made, that we are now writing these basically falsified Pokédex entries, and that's how things come to be. Don't know. One thing worth bringing up at least. But if we think about how it might work, again, as I was saying, Legends Arceus seems to be a case of you are actually researching the Pokemon for the first time. So where is all this information going to come from? So if we take a standard Pokédex entry, in this case from Sword and Shield, but as we mentioned earlier, the majority of them are very similar, what information does this Pokédex entry have? Well, firstly, it's got a picture of the Pokemon. As I've already mentioned, in Arceus, maybe this could be some sort of actual sketch, as opposed to the model being straight there. Then we have the general information about the Pokemon, including the name and the number in the Pokédex. Now, the number in the Pokédex, again, is weird if we are saying this is the first Pokédex being made, at least for Sinnoh, because how would you know if the first Pokemon you encounter is a Bibarel? How do you know that Bibarel is going to be number 11? You don't. He's going to be number 1 because he's the first one you found. Unless, of course, he becomes number 1, then you find a Bidoof, Bidoof becomes number 1, Bibarel becomes number 2, and so on and so forth. It doesn't make sense, if we're building a new Pokédex, for the numbers to be basically pre-populated. They would have to be just based on the order we catch them. Do I think they're going to do anything with the numbers here? I don't think so. It probably would get too confusing because suddenly then every person's game has different numbers and there's no easy way to categorize them in that way. It would probably get too confusing. I can see it possibly happening, but I just don't think. Again, it's probably straying too far from the formula and too far from what has been before. So the numbers will probably still pre-populate, and similarly the name will probably still pre-populate as well. Again, we can't have you building your own Pokédex and filling in Pikachu's name in terms of something else, which would be again confusing. Similarly, the species name, mouse Pokemon for Pikachu, this maybe offers a little bit more freedom because maybe you could make them up yourself. Maybe, rather than Pikachu being the mouse Pokemon, maybe someone would call him the electric mouse Pokemon, or, the Zappy Pokemon. I don't know. It would be interesting because, again, how are you going to know you catch a Pikachu? How do you know it's the mouse Pokemon? Again, it's because he is very close to a mouse, but again, maybe it would be cool to be able to name himself, and maybe some option, just maybe a setting to say just show me the standard names. I don't really care about naming them myself, but offering it as an option could be interesting. Then we have a few more pieces of information. Obviously the type, again, we can't allow this anything. It's got to pre-populate here. We can't really just print the type out. Now, one thing you could say is, well, the Pokédex shouldn't show you the type straight away. Sure, catch the Pokemon, but don't fill the type in until you have figured it out yourself, i.e. maybe you have to use the Pokemon in battle and take some damage, and then whether it's not very effective, super effective, etc., maybe that then pre-populates that type then in the Pokédex. It does happen in this case in some battles in the recent games where if you're encountering a Pokemon for the first time, it does not show you the type effectiveness on your moves when you're battling it. However, once you have registered it to the Pokédex, it then pre-populates that information. So you can argue that, okay, well, battling it in the first place is allowing you to learn the type, and that's how it gets populated there. Or you could say, well, the Pokédex is telling you afterwards. But for this game here in Legends Arceus, you could say, well, if you battle it, then you can figure out what type it is. Similar to how in one of the screenshots, Garchomp doesn't have a level. We could say, well, battling it first doesn't really give you information. You have to, glean information from that, and then you populate it in the future. Something like that. We then have the height and the weight. Now, this is a contentious thing across the whole franchise, effectively, because Go has different heights and weights for Pokemon. It's just, okay, well, not every Pikachu is going to be the same weight, surely. So is it an average? Is it just, the base level? It doesn't make sense for it to be a hard to be a hard value effectively. So maybe this could be handled slightly differently in the Arceus game. I wouldn't want them to go too far into how Pokemon Go does it, because the different weights is sort of like just eye candy effectively. It doesn't really mean anything at all. It doesn't have any effect on the game itself. One thing worth mentioning is obviously in Let's Go, the height, I think the height and the weight possibly, or just the size in general, is variable, because again, building on Go, so they could inherit some of that into the Arceus game, and then it can be maybe some, just something extra for you to do. Maybe if you catch different Pokemon, they will have different heights and weights, and maybe then there's something around there to sort of trying to figure out what the height range is, or the weight range is for a Pokemon. That might be interesting, I'm not entirely sure. But it's something they could carry across, because it would make more sense if you're going for more of like an RPG, type deal, where not everything is the same height and weight, effectively. And then of course we have the actual description of the Pokemon. As I said, I don't think we'll be able to actually define this ourselves. Whether we then actually, maybe it's like when you register it to the Pokédex, you see your player character actually writing in the Pokédex to sort of put that in there, which is then helps imply, well, this is just your 10-year-old or however old the character is actually, just writing some notes down about what you've seen. But this could be expanded upon, as we'll talk about in a minute. Finally then we have the motion and the cry option, and also the habitat option. So motion and cry, again, if we're just going for like a drawn picture rather than a model, the motion is probably not going to be there. And the cry, similarly, it's not a electric a device. It's not going to be able to play the cry back to you, so there's no real way to implement that into a notepad type Pokédex. So whether that would just be forgotten about, or whether it can be added in anyway as something that enhances the gameplay as opposed to enhances the setting, I guess. The habitat as well is another thing to discuss. So this could be down to the player character, either populating as you explore the adventure, i.e. as you encounter more Bidoof, it fills in automatically on your Pokédex. So in some games, you catch it, it tells you exactly where it's available in the whole region, which is a little bit, okay, well the Pokédex clearly knew that already, and it's just telling us now. However, in the case we're writing a new Pokédex, it's not going to know. So whether actually seeing the Pokemon in the wild allows you to then update your Pokédex to record that information, not necessarily manually. You could say it could be manually by the actual player going in and putting like stamps on a map somewhere to say, yep, okay, Bidoof can be found here. Bidoof can be found here, which builds into the RPG aspect because it's, it's then on the player to actually do some of this stuff. But it could be automatically populated, so similar to what the current games have, except rather than be everything is there already, it's as you explore, and maybe if you cross to the other part of Sinnoh and see a Bidoof again, then your Pokédex also marks as, yep, we saw a Bidoof here at one point. So we'll have to see how that goes, but I'm imagining it shouldn't just pre-populate everything like it does in the normal games. That just doesn't make any sense. That's at least my opinion there. So that's the Pokédex information. Now, how could this actually affect particularly the gameplay of Legends Arceus? Now, we've already seen the trailer where we can throw a Pokeball and catch a Pokemon, in this case a Shinx. We also know that we can battle some of them, possibly to weaken them down to allow easier capture. So I imagine not every Pokemon is going to be available for catch just by tossing a Pokeball and that being that. You will have to battle some. However, is there going to be anything more than that? And is it just going to be a case of once you catch the Pokemon, that's that, and you have the Pokédex entry and you're done? Or could there be different levels to it of, actually, if we go back to the original, I guess, mantra that was given to us from the website, we're going to have to catch, survey, and research wild Pokemon, okay? So catching we've got down, we know how to catch Pokemon. Survey, how do we survey and also research, because they're in a similar vein. So one part of this could be tracking Pokemon and actually seeing what they're doing in their wild habitats. So maybe there's some special skill or some action you can do to search the area for footprints, and then you can follow the footprints and then eventually come across a Pokemon and sort of research them that way. This could also be used for finding rarer Pokemon, so maybe, okay, you can only normally find Shinx walking around, but if you tracked them down, maybe you can find yourself a Luxio or a Luxray. That would be interesting, and would add a little bit of extra, not so strategy, but interactivity to finding and catching Pokemon. As I say, it might also be a case of, well, if you follow a Pokemon or track a Pokemon for long enough, you can learn some more about it, and that helps fill in your Pokédex. One other idea I had was maybe actually there could be a little bit of strategy to this. So building off of looking at Breath of the Wild, which is definitely an inspiration for this game. Breath of the Wild has a huge physics system, and food is one part of that. Not just cooking, of course, but actually apples. So if you toss apples down, some animals can actually eat them, for example. So maybe there could be something similar in this game where you can actually collect, berries, probably is the most likely one. And then if you lay berries down as a trap, but as a to incentivize wild Pokemon into the area, and maybe then you can find out, okay, well, this Pokemon likes this berry type, or this berry type, or sour berries, sweet berries, etc. And again, build up your Pokédex there. I guess what I'm thinking about here is if we think about Pokemon Snap, your new Pokemon Snap, and the trailer we saw for that recently, where we have a Photodex, which is similar to a Pokédex, of course. It has all the same information, just also with pictures and photos. We have, as you can see here on the right hand side, 4 different levels of 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, and as obviously in Snap, as you get better photos. So first photo he's just walking around, second one he's doing an action, third one he is actually doing a special action, and then the fourth one is actually going even further and doing a very special action. And we assume, without having being able to play the games yet, we assume these extra actions are triggered either by the player looking at it at a certain time, or throwing some sort of apple or fruit down, or using the glow berries and so on. So glow berries, I'm not entirely sure what the glow fruit, something like that, who knows. But what I'm getting at is we could do a similar thing on Legends Arceus. Now, of course, it wouldn't be photos necessarily, but maybe your level in the Pokédex for this Pokemon increases over time. So maybe this could be a points-based system. So maybe if maximum is 100 points. So 0 points is you've never even seen the Pokemon. As you first start to see the Pokemon in the wild, you get a few points for that. If you catch it, there's a few points for that one. And then as you go, maybe if you're tracking it, seeing it, interact with other Pokemon, that sort of thing, maybe those points rises, which rises the level of the Pokedex for that particular Pokemon, as well as overall. And then eventually, so the goal is to sort of like get a full points for every Pokemon, or at least as many Pokemon as you can. And this could give you some sort of tangible benefit. So maybe the more you research a particular Pokemon, the more common it becomes in the wild. So that would be interesting to get in. So rather than maybe Gibble starts off really rare in a cave, but then if you start researching Gibble a bit more and tracking him, he becomes more common and start to spawn more. And of course that would then lead into the idea of, well, actually, maybe this is how shiny hunting can be built into these games. If you raise the Pokédex level even higher, maybe it increases the shiny rate of the Pokemon. That sort of deal. Same goes for increasing rarity or decreasing rarity more. And maybe it's a case of, well, maybe you only need like 50% for each Pokemon to sort of get like a gold star, but then there is the possibility to raise it higher and go to 100% for a platinum star or something like that, which then gives you maybe some shiny boost. And this could also lead into other things like, hidden abilities, better IVs, egg moves, that sort of thing. So we could build in, similar to how the Dex Nav works in Auras, and also how the number battled works in Sword and Shield. The more you battle of that Pokemon, and the more you chain it in the Dex Nav, both shiny rate increases, even if it's terrible in Sword and Shield. You can find brilliant Pokemon in Sword and Shield, which allows you to get egg moves and higher IVs. And in Auras, the same thing applies true as well. Hidden abilities, egg moves, IVs, etc. So obviously, what I'm saying is we could do a similar system here, but rather than it be based on just the number of Pokemon you've battled of that species, or the number of times you've chained with the Dex Nav, it could be a combination of different things. So rather than just making you go around and battle the same Pokemon 50 times, maybe you can battle them a few times, track them a few times to earn some more points, extra points, that sort of thing. So actually make it engaging, as opposed to, it will probably still be repetitive to some extent, but at least give a few options. Maybe the player can go around and catch 1,000 Shinx to max out their decks. However, maybe they can go around and catch 10 Shinx and also then do 20 trackings of it, or something like that, to actually just give some variety and actually extend the gameplay more. Because if it is currently just you catch a Pokemon and the Pokédex is complete for that Pokemon, it's going to very quickly become a simulator of Let's Go or Go similarly, where you walk around the region and just toss Pokeballs at things, which is not going to be engaging, and it's going to be, especially if there is nothing else to do, it's going to quickly get old, and this experiment that Game Freak are undertaking would just not work very well, at least in my opinion. So there are a few things we could get into there, and we won't know more. I suspect it will be one of the things that gets focused on in another trailer or presentation in the future, if there is something extra to the Pokédex rather than just catching Pokemon straight up. I very much hope there is, because it seems like an interesting way to go about it. As I've already mentioned, shiny hunting is like one sort of the end game activities for people, and if the actual gameplay of these games builds into that, then that's definitely all in all a good thing for these games, because as well as the gameplay actually needs to be engaging first, it needs to be, or it's helpful for it to be, both revisiting. If you revisit the game again, you need to have some enjoyment out of it and replay it through again, replayability. And also just when you get to the end game or the post game, what happens when you catch all the Pokemon in the Sinnoh region? What can you do? Well, you can go on and you can do this and X and Y and Z to actually max out, do a bit more than just the Pokédex and give you something more to do, especially in gameplay variety. So that's my thinking, at least, guys. Do let me know down below in the description if that sounds interesting to you, or whether you've got any other ideas of how the Pokédex could actually function slightly differently in this game as opposed to the existing games we've seen so far. But that's going to be it for me for today, so I hope you all have a lovely day. I'll be seeing you next time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, my friends.